The British were embarrassed, were humiliated, and their two failed invasions of Gaza. So remember, this is one of the most powerful navy in the world. It has the most troops that they can call, and they're still losing to a relatively, comparatively ragtag army force. These guys were, they were determined. And we could see that on many fronts. At the first two battles of Gaza, at Medina, at Gallipoli, they were underestimating the Ottoman soldiers, which is why they were getting defeated.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. قال سبحانه وتعالى سيروا في الأرض كيف كان عاقبة الذين من قبلهم. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And as I just read the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Siru fil ardi kayfa kana akhibatu alladhina min qablihim. Allah Azza wa Jal saying that travel the earth and see what has happened to the people before you. This is another way of meaning that learn the history, understand what different peoples in the world have gone through. Either they are remembered or they are completely lost in what they had achieved in their lives. Today, dear brothers, we have a very interesting guest. I think we had our brother Umair. It's kind of funny to say brother Umair. He's, how old are you, Umair? You're what, 16? Huh? 15?
Yeah, I'll turn 16 later.
Well, I hope, inshallah, you're going to be turning 16. But he is 15 years old. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, and a historian. That is, this is something amazing. With the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal gives these, this type of skills and talents to people. Subhanallah, Umair is one of them. He, because of his readings, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first of all, bless you, akhi, Allahumma barik. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your parents. Who have done the hard work that you can appear on shows such as Islamic Oasis, and to discuss topics such as what we're going to discuss today. Brothers and sisters, today, inshallah, we're going to discuss a very interesting topic, and the topic is the Uthmani Khilafah, but in a very different way. Usually when we talk about Uthmani Khilafah, we just talk about the importance of the Khilafah and what the Ottomans had done, or the Uthmaniyin, what they had achieved, what it means, what 1924 meant for us, and as an ummah. But today we have Umair. Inshallah, we are going to discuss with him the Ottoman victories and maybe defeats, the role of the armies, the kind of role that army in general played, their tactics, their methods, and in some ways also the effect of the Ottomans on the Europeans, and then maybe at the same time what happened to us today. So inshallah, let's begin. Again, Brother Umair, welcome to Islamic Oasis Live, akhi.
Jazakallah khair for having me.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah, tabarakallah. So let's begin this topic, Umair. So when we speak of military tactics, nowadays most of the world talks about the American, the American army or Western armies in general, because in the last 100 years, at least, if not 175 years, that's what we have seen. Mm-hmm. Let's begin with this. What is the most unique thing about the Ottoman armies that is worth speaking? Obviously, a lot, they ruled the world for almost, 400 or 500 years. So, go ahead, Sheikh.
So, the Uthmani Khilafah, at its peak, we see that they weren't like conventional armies. All right, back then, about when they became a caliphate in 1517, and throughout that time period before the Tanzimat era in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, we see that the Ottoman Empire relied heavily on slave soldiers, or the Janissary, the Yenicheri corps in the army. These were career soldiers. And Europe, though, at this time, they were usually using mainly farmers
Mm.
who had to buy their own armor, so they didn't really have much like great equipment. And but they also had their rich noble knights. All right, so these guys came from the family of noblemen, and they were usually rich, and so they could buy the proper equipment that you would usually see on medieval knights. And then later, we see throughout the time, we see that every single country in the 1700s, Napoleonic era kind of a thing, they start wearing less heavy uniforms and more like colorful uniforms. All right, so we see red, blue, white, green, yellow. We see all these colors coming in using muskets and stuff. The Ottoman army, they did the same thing, and they kind of did use that for quite kind of a long time, but it kind of still stayed the same until the 1830s, I believe, when they finally abolished the Janissary Corps. They still use the Janissaries, long hats, the red uniforms, the same thing. They just were using different arms instead of pistols, and or not really pistols, but like kind of pistols, but they were more like muskets. And bow and arrows and swords and stuff, they now use modern rifles. So that's the only difference. But what happened was the Janissaries, due to them being such a powerful force, they were known for overthrowing sultans.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it seems like the Janissaries were actually there to do the opposite job, which is to protect the sultans. But then later on, they became a headache. But before you go to, I guess this era, who are the Janissaries? I mean, I don't.
Yeah, so the Janissaries, they were basically slave soldiers. Like you generally call them slave soldiers, but if we actually see of what they were mainly Christian Balkan parents giving their child to the Ottoman army. Of course, there's some times where the Ottomans took them forcefully, but it was generally them giving them to the Ottoman army, because in the Ottoman army, you could rise to powers of influence and wealth. So they would was a good career path. We see that the Janissaries were usually the bodyguards of the sultans. They were like their commanders were all the best friends of the sultans and the family of the sultan. So they were around them quite often, and they were used with them. All right. They used them a lot in wars and stuff. And it was a very honorable thing to be. You're a career soldier for the Ottoman Empire and the sultan. So they basically just gave their children away. They were converted to Islam because they were children. So they were taught Islam, then they were taught military using arms, tactics, strategies, and were by the time they were able to fight, they were very well trained and very effective soldiers. All right. But so this is basically what the Janissaries were. But
is there any difference between them and Mamluk in some way? I'm asking because Mamluk also were slaves. I mean, and then it seems very, kind of close to what Janissaries were. They were also, I guess, they were slaves also, and then they were trained into becoming armies. And Mamluk also became an unbelievable force. Later on, took the Khilafah also. But I was wondering if there was any connection. But go on, continue.
Yeah, so they were pretty similar. I don't know much about Mamluks, but just from hearing about them and like learning about Salah ad-Din Aziz, Mamluks, and Sultan Qutuz, I would say that they were, and people usually call them as an elite fighting force. So there's really similar. The Janissaries were the same thing. They were career soldiers. They were also very elite fighting force. They were probably at some points in time they were the best troops in the world. They were the best.
Oh wow!
So
because of their training, what made them great? Or equipment, training, or was it anything else that they? Because I mean, Europe. It's interesting. I mean, or in the, I guess most of the Middle East was. I mean, is there any comparison? I mean, China, was there any role of the Chinese? Anything, or was it just? I mean, these guys were it. They knew what they were doing, and nobody else could dominate them. That's it.
So Chinese at this time, which we're talking about like the 1500s, like early 1500s to like the 1830s. So in this massive time frame, the Chinese were slowly declining in this, but they were still inventing weaponry like artillery, new ways of launching big balls that could blow up. All right. They They did the same thing with muskets and gunpowder. And it first spread to the Ottomans because, they're in the middle between Europe and them.
Right.
And we see that they used it, that the Ottomans relied heavily on artillery and their janissaries using like gunpowder powered weaponry. That's how they conquered the Safavids. They defeated the Safavids at Chaldiran. That's how they defeated the Mamluks. That's what Sultan said, because using these cannons and stuff, and the same thing when taking over Constantinople. Remember the big cannon, Shahi Top, I believe was the name. That was what they used to break through. So we see that China did heavily influence the Ottoman victories. If gunpowder wasn't found, we could probably question if the Ottomans could have been able to take Constantinople at the time that they did in the 1450s, that it could also question if they even could take the Safavids, because the Safavids were also a very great army. It's just that they didn't have the same weaponry and their troops weren't trained to use them or be around them, how to combat them in a way.
So let's continue. And so now we're okay. So can you, just give me the description between what years are we talking about here when we're talking about, I guess, their highest, meaning when were they best? Beginning of 1800s, and when does the decline begin?
Well, I can't really say for certain if there was a decline, and you could probably find different people might disagree, but we see that they first start declining, like in terms of a good fighting force, into more of a political tool to overthrow sultans and stuff and get the backing of other sultans. We could probably say like in the 1680s, in the Second Siege of Vienna, where the Ottomans failed. You could probably say that, or you could say the first Russian invasion of Crimea. You could also say
that's true.
Miserably in the 1700s.
Wow. So Crimea, meaning what is now Ukraine, or at least part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at Vienna. Okay, so and they were defeated there. Why?
Well, the Russians, I think it was more because at this time, the Janissaries, they were very corrupt, all right? So they already have overthrown many Ottoman sultans by this time. They were becoming more of they were more focused on internal politics and actually winning wars. We see that the Ottoman Empire kind of turned into that. After Sultan Selim, like Suleiman the Magnificent, like he did go out and conquer territories, but not as much as his father. All right. So we see that after those two, they start, they pick a guy in the government that's the closest to him. They'll give him more money, give him more power and more influence in the government. And they'll pick that brother or cousin or nephew or whatever and kill his uncle, father, whatever. All right. They'll kill him and put him in power. So that's why the Janissaries were basically playing with the politics inside the capital, and we're not focusing on defeating external enemies that were already becoming more powerful, like Russia and Austria-Hungary, and then there's France, Prussia, England, and all those other countries. They're developing, they're modernizing, and they're on top of that, they're expanding. All right, colonial empires we see now in this time period.
Sheikh, the birth of the British Empire happens when?
So you can't really say, I would probably say after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which I believe was in 1566. I might have to look at that, but
okay, but you're looking at mid 1500s.
Mid 1500s, early 1600s. We see that they start colonizing the Americas alongside Spain and Portugal, and then they also start colonizing India and Africa.
And both of these were Muslim territories, India and Africa.
Not entirely Africa, but yeah, they were all Muslim territories.
So then the British or the Ottomans really couldn't do much in that era. I mean, I'm going to come back to the Ottomans, but I guess I'm trying to figure out, you have this fearless, you have this army that is so huge that is feared. But okay, so let's from the defeat in Vienna, what happens to the Ottomans after that, especially the armies?
So the Ottomans, like I said, they started the janissary in the army, and they started caring more about internal politics and caring about their paychecks over actually wanting to win the wars.
Mm.
So due to this, now they all care about money, and they would also take the money. All right, so they would kill
Also,
families,
briberies were happening and things like this.
corruption. You
Uh,
could kind of see in some places.
Nepotism in general, I guess. Well.
Yeah, and they're putting proxies in power. All right, so people who will give them more money, more everything. All right, so now they're caring more about internal politics. So while that was happening, Britain was invading India, Britain was invading Africa, Russia was attacking them, Austria-Hungary was attacking them, and well, in India, though, if we see the last, and like one of the last strong Sultan Selim al-Awwal, he actually fought the Portuguese over India. All right, near the cities of Goa, it was the Ottoman-Portuguese War. All right, so a lot of the wars was happening in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean to protect India from the Portuguese. But what happened is after the war, after Sultan Selim al-Awwal, now they had to consolidate, because now after him, he conquered all the way up to Algeria. All right, and then all the way from Tabriz in Iran all the way to Algeria. So now they have all this, and then all the way down to Yemen. So now they have all this territory, and they need all their troops that they could get. All right, so they start taking away their troops from these regions and putting them in new positions, especially since at this time we also see the Spanish Empire emerging after the Reconquista. So now they're the new European superpower. The main man in Europe was the Spanish. All right.
Oh,
and then
wow.
So now those two are going head to head. While
the Ottomans and the Spanish.
We see that the Christian League and the Holy League were fighting with the Ottomans. And well, we could probably say that even though the Holy League was like the Holy Roman Empire, Spain and Portugal, and Italian city-states like Genoa and Venice, like they all hated the Ottomans because the Ottomans have been kicking out the Genoese and the Venetians and the Spanish from all their new colonial territories, like Trabzon. There's the Greek islands. I'm forgetting all their names, but I'll have to remember their names. But all the Greek islands, Cyprus, Sicily, they're kicking out all of these Italian and Portuguese regions, and now they all want revenge. They want it back. So we see that they all joined together in a holy league to go against the Ottoman Empire, because now they're the superpower of the world. All right, and compared to all of them, they're stronger than them all combined.
So shit, who the Ottomans are still.
Yeah.
So and then so this is, we're talking end of 1800s.
No, this is the 1500s.
And this 1500s. So now, I mean, kind of go through that for me. I mean, if you don't mind, please, because I'm not the expert. So if you have the 1500s, then 16, 17, 18, and then the whole thing collapses in 1924. But even though we're saying mid 1500s is when we lose Vienna, is that accurate? 1500s, mid 1500s.
Yes, that's when it happened.
So that does have a huge impact on the Muslims, that defeat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it seems like after that defeat, we kind of stopped knocking on the door of Europe in general.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me, what does that mean? But even though we still had, I mean, the fall of Constantinople happens when?
1453. So this is Muhammad Sultan Selim. And Selim al-Awwal, he dies in 1520s. I'm forgetting. Suleiman the Magnificent, he loses at Vienna, and then he dies. And then his children all squabble for power. So one thing is that Sultan Selim al-Awwal, he only had one son, which was Suleiman the Magnificent. So there was no war for the throne.
So that was safe. He just comes, takes power, and moves on.
But Suleiman the Magnificent, he had a lot of children. And so they all went head to head, like the older ones did, not the younger ones. It was mainly the older ones. And they killed each other. I think it was another Mehmet, who came to power at this time.
I mean, was this so common, Sheikh? I mean, at least from what I know, is that there was a lot of killing for. Sultan Muhammad Fatih also seems like he did his part in making sure that he takes power. Also, it seems. Is that true? And because I've heard that there was two other brothers before him who was supposed to take power, at least one.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and then he takes power because, what I'm saying is the idea that family members were killed to make sure that somebody always takes power. So it wasn't good to have brothers. People would just be killed.
Yeah.
Not, it's just... So that's politics on the political side.
Mm-hmm.
But the army is still kept intact, is kept powerful, kept trained. But how did that happen, Sheikh? Where you have this internal politics that's happening within the courtyards, but the army is still on its feet because who were in control of the armies? The sultans were, or were there people who knew what needs to be done with the armies?
So the sultans, well, some of them, not all of them, were mainly in control by the janissaries, who were the leaders of the army. So there was janissary leaders who had control of the sultan, not direct control. Like there was kind of a circle of power, kind of a thing, dynamic going on between the sultan and the janissary. So the janissaries, they used the sultan because they knew this guy was going to back them. He was a militaristic guy. He wanted war and stuff. All right, like conquest and glory. And the sultan, but he had influence in the army too. But the janissaries, they had this guy in power, so he would give them more money, more resources, more everything, more power, wealth, whatever you name it, he will give it to them. But the main problem with the Ottoman Empire is that they stopped modernizing. All right, so they were falling behind Europe. Europe was inventing new ways to wage war. And this was evident in the Napoleonic Wars in the end of the 1700s and the beginning of the 1800s. We see that the Ottomans their skin was saved by the British on numerous occasions. Yes, because Napoleon invaded Egypt and the Ottomans were going to get defeated, but the British Navy came in and blockaded Napoleon from getting any supplies. So he had to figure out a way to retreat. He, by himself and with a couple other troops, he kind of broke through the blockade and left. But he left majority of his army to fend for themselves in Egypt. So we see that due to this, the Ottoman Empire became heavily reliant on Britain and France. Same thing in the Crimean War. They got their skin saved again by the British and the French, who wanted, so Britain and France and Russia and Austria-Hungary, they all kind of wanted the Ottoman Empire's territories. Okay, so in the Crimean War, which happened in the 1830s and 1840s, we see that the British and the French did not want the Russians to have the Ottoman territories. Okay, because the Dardanelles was basically, you know the Dardanelles, Bosphorus Strait and the Sea of Marmara. Mm-hmm. This was what the Russians really wanted. All right, for centuries, this is why they hated the Ottomans, was for this strait of land. And the Ottomans,
because of the sea routes. That's what they wanted to make sure that they have those. Okay.
All right. And the British and the French didn't want them to do that because they wanted to make sure that Russia didn't become too powerful. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they gave weapons and even brought their own armies in during the Crimean War to help the Ottomans out, to defeat the Russians, which is why you could technically say it was an Ottoman victory. But if it was an actual victory, it was not. What I mean is that it wasn't actually a victory. They became so reliant on British money, French money. They became indebted to them, which is what broke their economy. Okay, so and they also, their army was also, and due to these debts, they haven't been funding their army. So their army was falling centuries behind. Well, not centuries, maybe more like decades behind compared to the
British.
Speedily advancing European powers. All right, because this is the industrial age. Everyone's inventing new things, the light bulb, trains, everything you can think of, they're inventing this. And then they're putting this into effect. Everyone is having new trains, light bulbs, new semi-automatic weaponry. All right. So, but the Ottomans, on the other hand, they weren't doing any of that. They were too busy trying to find money to pay their debts. Okay, so this was after the Crimean War. Then the Tanzimat era happens. They're put in power was a parliament in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in this era. So after that, it kind of became a more liberalized government. Okay, and what happened?
Hold on, there's a lot of terminologies here. First, we're talking about. Okay, so just go with Tanzimat just a bit, because you're saying that was another reason for the decline. So what exactly are the Tanzimat?
So the Tanzimat Reformation was when they added a parliament and a constitution, which checked the Sultan's power. All right. So he didn't have absolute control of the government and the territories. He had to first go through parliament. And then there's a constitution that he has to abide by. Okay, so this is before the Young Turks. All right, so this is just some guys in the government who didn't like the Sultan, the Grand Vizier and stuff. They wanted to add a parliament and a constitution to model that of the European nations in the French Revolution. All right. So after the Tanzimat, though, we see that in 1878, Sultan Abdul-Hamid comes to power. All right. And so he was really young, and the people in parliament, they thought he was naive. All right. That he was a dimwit.
Yeah. Young right? Means what? How old do you think he was? Around what age?
I'm not sure about young, but by young, I mean by like he was inexperienced. He was relatively, I have to look for his exact age, but.
No, but in general, Sheikh, when we look at the sultans, what made them sultans? Their experience, or just by birth they became sultans?
By birth, and whoever could kill their brothers the fastest.
Okay, so did that also play? So that's, I guess, because of that. Would it be true? Let's say, if you're going to analyze this, would it be true to say that the Janissaries or those guys, they realize that maybe the sultans are not up to par in what it takes to run this khilafah or this, and they didn't have a choice but to kind of take over and run the affairs. When I'm saying running the affairs means that they were. Are they running affairs? Just the army, or affairs as a whole? Are they running the nation, or are they just making sure that the army stays intact and doesn't fall in court politics?
Well, it's mainly regarding the army, but they also wanted money and power. So
is this from the beginning? This is not from the beginning, is it?
Not from the beginning. This happened later, after they became so powerful and become the most feared army unit in the whole world. Then they start like, oh, we want more money now. So they start overthrowing sultans, stealing money, killing family members, and putting into place sultans that that have the same ideas, that they'll give him more money, give him more power.
So Sheikh, when Sultan Abdul Hamid, or let's say Muhammad Sultan, or Sultan Fatih, when he is around, are the Janissaries there?
Yes, the Janissaries are there.
Okay, there, and then but he's able to control them. He is able to maintain the status quo.
Yeah. Well, the Janissaries, what they were also looking for is someone who would create war. We see that Muhammad al-Fatih, he was a conqueror. He was al-Fatih. All right. So they like that, because whenever you go to war, usually you get a bunch of bonuses of captured stuff.
Ghanima.
Right? Huh?
Ghanima, I guess. Okay.
Ghanima. Yeah, that's probably what it is. I'm not exactly sure, but you get a lot of bonuses from the gold and wealth that you take from the newly conquered territories. And which is also one reason why the Janissaries supported Sultan Selim al-Awwal, is because his two brothers, I'm forgetting the third one, but he's the second youngest, second oldest. It was Ahmad, who was the oldest brother, and he was Sultan Bayezid the second, not the Thunderbolt, the second. He was the son of Muhammad al-Fatih. His son, his oldest son, Ahmad, was a pacifist like him. Okay, the Janissaries did not like that, so they backed Sultan Selim al-Awwal, who, as we know, went on to conquer swaths of territory, uniting the Middle East. And so this is why they went with him. And because when he was a prince, usually he would actually invade the Caucasus and fight with the Safavids, even though his dad kept reprimanding him for doing this. Like, he kept picking fights with everyone around him. The Janissaries liked that. And he would give them a lot of bonuses. He would give them a lot of money, all right, for their conquests. And we see that
who exactly are the Safavids here?
So the Safavids, they're this new Shia order at this time. So they were also new. They only had one Shah, and his name was Shah Ismail. He was the first Shah. So basically, he and Selim were both young, relatively young, in their 20s, and they both wanted glory and power, and they both felt threatened by each other. All right. Bayezid kept wanting peace, so he kept sending gifts and stuff to Shah Ismail, because Shah Ismail still had a pretty powerful army relatively to the region compared to the Mamluks. All right, because he was a new guy. He had this new, beautiful army, not compared to the Ottomans. The Ottomans were definitely stronger, but they had a pacifist sultan, which was Sultan Bayezid II. So, but Selim, he wanted, because they didn't like each other, they would curse each other in letters or mock each other. And they would send gifts to each other. Okay, like one time, Shah Ismail sent a bunch of drugs to Selim to call him a crackhead. And he got offended by that and sent him a rag to show that he's just one of those, soothsayers, like what they were doing. So they hated each other, all right? And so when Selim won the fratricidal civil war between him and Ahmad, the first thing he did was gather a big army and chase down Ismail, and he defeated him at Chaldiran, and then Ismail became a crackhead and didn't do anything else. So Shah Ismail, he's an interesting character. Okay.
How do you say his name again? Shah Ismail. Okay. Shah Ismail. Okay.
All right. He was an interesting character. All right. So in the beginning, he was a Shia protector. He considered himself a Shia protector. Okay. Like he was the big guy of the Shias. All right. And what happened was, over time, as the new government, he was a very good poet. All right. Like he was the Shah of the new Safavids. All right. And it was a very powerful country, like I mentioned. And what happened was, he would then consider himself God. At some point in his poetry, he claimed himself to be God. So Selim would use that to call all Shias kuffar. All right. He made a fatwa from the Shaykh of Islam that said all Shias are kuffar and they should all be killed. And that if jihad to go against them. So Ismail, well, you could not generalize this, all right? Not everyone believed Ismail to be God. There might have been some, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know much about the Safavids except this one guy, because he fought Sultan Selim. But what he did is that in Shias in Anatolia, in the Ottoman Empire, he would actually sponsor their rebellions. There was a very famous rebellion, the Shahkulu Rebellion, where the Ottomans were getting, they were wreaking havoc in Anatolia, burning farms, killing people and stuff. All right.
They were Shia within the Ottoman territories also, right? I mean, including the capital, they were Shia there.
There were, but not all of them were joining the rebellion. Majority of them did. And so using this, Sultan Selim, when he came to power, he made this fatwa saying that they were all kuffar. And so he massacred hundreds of thousands of Shias in Turkey, in Anatolia. So, and then when he went over to Chaldiran and he defeated Ismail, he was like, okay, I'll leave him be. All right. Because now they can't even do anything. Their government is it's on fire. Their Shah is running away to his palaces out in far land. He isn't doing anything except smoking drugs. All right. And so now they have this new government in shambles. They're trying to fix their problem. They're weak. So he sets his side onto the Mamluks. And that's what he does. And then he conquers them and so this is why what the Janissaries were. This is why they put into power Muhammad al-Fatih, or not exactly put into power, but they supported them, making sure that their brothers couldn't take into power. So they would support Selim, Muhammad al-Fatih. Suleiman the Magnificent didn't have that problem because he didn't have any brothers to go against him. But he was like his father. He wanted to have glory. He wanted to conquer places. But so Suleiman the Magnificent, he was left with this he was left with this really big empire, big new empire. And he had to consolidate the Ottoman power at some point, because now they're spread thin. All right. And they're facing threats from the Christian European nations. So that's what he does. So he kind of slows down the expansion but he still tries to do like some campaigns, as we see at Vienna, into Poland, into the Caucasus, and so on. But after him, his children, they did do some like campaigns and attacks, but they mainly went on the defensive. We see in 1683 they try to attack Vienna again.
Oh, okay.
So there was these two, and then they failed then again too.
Sheikh, when did the Ottomans start actually losing territory?
You could probably say that 1683 is the most accurate way, but of course that's the more accurate because that's when they lost the siege of Vienna, and after that, in the beginning of the 1700s, the Russians invaded, and they took over Crimea and the Caucasus. They kicked the Ottomans out, and we see that a lot of the Muslims, Tatars in the region, they migrated to Anatolia. And so some people would say that this war was the actual war that we see the decline of the Ottoman Empire in its territory-wise and military-wise. We see that it was a very antique army later on. But yeah, you could probably say that either 1683 or the Russian War, which I think was the early 1700s. It was before 1730s, but it was somewhere in that. And that you could kind of say that the Ottomans started declining in power.
And the Russians at this time, are when you talk about Crimea I guess this territory of Ukraine and Crimea, this whole area, this was Russian territory, I guess, that was taken by the Muslims.
No, it was Mongolian territory when they conquered it.
The Mongols, okay, and then they took it back, or they took it from the Mongols, or is it because the Mongols became Muslim and so it was?
Well, it depends. So some regions it was that they became Muslim, but in other regions it was because they conquered it. Depends on exactly where. So some Tartars became Muslims, then some Mongols did not become Muslim, and you had to fight them. So that's kind of what happened.
Now, the Crusades. Crusades are also happening in 1500s, no, or 1600.
The Crusades, in what sense? Like Salah ad-Din?
So, Salah ad-Din comes along when?
He's in 1087.
Oh boy. Okay, so we're all the way somewhere in the. Okay, so what exactly happened? So you have when the Tartar came, the Mongol defeat from the Muslim lands happened when?
The Battle of Ain Jalut, Battle of Ain Jalut.
Right, and what date is that exactly? I mean, you're looking at
was the 1260s, I believe.
Okay, so in this time, the Ottomans are nowhere to be found.
No, it was
but so the Ottomans come along. So you have Salah ad-Din, and then you have the Tatar. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that when we look at what makes the Ottomans, what brings them into power? What is it that actually, because you have all these people, what is the exact timing of the coming of the Ottomans into power?
So they came into power. So actually not much is known, because remember at this time, the Ottomans, or the Turkish people in Anatolia, because there wasn't actually something called the Ottomans. It was just a tribe called the Osmanlus. All right. So they weren't actually, no one really knew much. They were illiterate. Majority were illiterate. Actually, one thing is, you know him, right?
Of course. Yeah.
The only shred of evidence that we have of his existence is one coin that says Osman, the son of Arturo.
But they say that his grave is there in Bursa. Is that?
His grave is too, but the shred of evidence that we know that he existed and that he was like the father of the Ottomans is because his grave was just a grave. It wasn't an elaborate monument. Okay.
Yes. So, but we are sure that is his grave.
Yes, I'm pretty sure. I hope it is.
Okay. No, I'm saying, because you're saying the only shred of evidence is that is his coin, which is very interesting. But Because okay, so these guys, when they're coming into power, they're just a bunch of tribes.
Yes, that joined up
and this tribe becomes what it becomes because of them being, I guess, in a very strategic landscape at that time. They're in the middle of the Europeans and the Muslim lands.
Yes.
Okay, so they basically become they are the ones who are kind of protecting the Muslim lands.
Yes. Not at this time. It was the Sultanate of Rome, which was like the predecessor of the Ottomans. Okay, they were the ones on the border, and in their territory were these Turkic tribes.
Uh-huh.
And then Osman comes to power. He takes over a bunch of Byzantine cities like Bursa, and then what happens is he conquers he not exactly conquers, but like he comes into power in the Sultanate of Rome. All right, and with this newfound power, after his death, his children, up until Muhammad al-Fatih, they start just taking and shrinking the territory of the Byzantines. All right, and so finally in 1453, they put the nail in the coffin and took over Constantinople. So this is where the Ottomans, so they were a Turkic tribe that rose to power, and then over time, they started chipping away at the Byzantine territories.
Okay, and then they take over Constantinople here.
Yes.
Okay, Sheikh, so you're saying one of the reasons for the fall of the, or at least decline of the Ottoman Empire is they failed to modernize the army. So when we talk about modernization, are we saying technology-wise they were not able to adapt?
Yes, that's kind of what I'm saying. So like technology-wise, at this time, we see a lot of innovations like railway systems.
And what was the reason for that, Sheikh? I mean, these are. I mean, at the end of the day, this was an army that had. They were able to get these big, huge cannons. They were constantly modernizing, and all of a sudden they don't.
This is one thing is that in every nation, there's those internal politics that happen that weaken the army. Okay, because now everyone's going head to head in the government. They're using their own army, so they have their own parts of the army that follow them, and then they're going head to head in wars.
So the armies are actually fighting each other?
Yeah, well, that happened with Sultan Selim. Okay, his father and his brother, they both had followers in the army who were with them, and then the Janissaries and parts of the Janissaries were with them. Part of the Janissaries were with Sultan Selim. Okay, so but when after Sultan Suleiman, we see that the army became its own political entity, kind of a thing. So like they were the ones who kind of, so of course there would be followers in the army of the Sultan that they're about to overthrow, and that they won't be supportive of this. So those guys were kind of in their way. So they would kill them and then take out the Sultan who they didn't like, and then put his brother or whoever, his family relative, into power that they do like. So it kind of went on like this, the Ottoman Empire.
So, okay, now let's go into the 1900s, I guess, the beginning of 1900s, until the complete fall of the Ottomani Khilafah. But there were some interesting battles, Sheikh. You know, when we met, we were talking about the Gaza, what happened, I guess, twice. There was also, I guess, the British tried. Was it the British that were trying to take Gaza? Twice.
Yes.
Okay, and then in this time, you're looking at the British losing close to 100,000 men.
Yes.
I mean, this is amazing, Sheikh.
This was at Gallipoli. We see about, I think it was, I have in my notes right here. I could actually look for the exact number of casualties of the British.
I mean, they were huge. They were huge, large numbers.
Just in Gallipoli, 300,000 men were injured, missing, or dead. Just at Gallipoli.
And they're fighting the Muslims at the time.
The Ottomans in World War I. Yeah.
Right. And then, and then comes so Sheikh, this is amazing. So the British were trying to take this area for quite a while. And then they're defeated twice.
So when it came to Gaza, we see that the three battles of Gaza, they all happened in the year of 1917. Okay. So the first two weren't exactly massive battles, but they were relatively large compared to the battles in Europe. Okay. So we see that the British, so throughout the war, the reason why the British were losing, because remember, this is one of the most powerful navy in the world. It has the most troops that they could call on. They have colonial troops from India, Africa, Australia, and Asia. And they're still losing to a relatively, comparatively primitive army. Not exactly, I wouldn't say primitive, but like older army, even though it's like its command structure, its mobilization methods, training methods were all up to date and were all modernized. We still see that compared to the British Army, it was a really it was a ragtag army force. They didn't have the population, they didn't have the economy to even pay the troops, and they didn't have the food to even feed the troops because they took all.
Why is that, Sheikh? I mean, really, that low. I mean, literally at that level.
So this comes back. So in 1908, when the Young Turks, the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, better known as the Young Turks. So basically, these guys were, Turkic exiles. That's Sultan Abdul Hamid exiled to Europe, and they studied secular ideas in Berlin, Paris, Zurich, London, you name it. In all these cities, they studied all these new secular ideas of the French Revolution, fraternity, equality. What were the other two? I'm forgetting them.
Yeah, well,
all those four. Like even their flag of the Young Turks, they had it in Ottoman Turkish on all four corners. Those four things. Okay, so they came back and overthrew Sultan Abdul Hamid. They added a parliament. Then a new caliph came, forgetting his name exactly. Then they also added a constitution. The caliph was almost powerless.
All right, just a face.
Face. Actually, I'm forgetting exactly what he said, but a German, one of the German officers in October 1909 actually quoted, I'm paraphrasing here, he basically said that if the Muslims were to find out that their caliph was powerless, there would be a big problem. I'm just paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. Right? It's because he knew, he could see, because he was one of the guys in there that were teaching the Ottoman army or like modernizing it, kind of a thing, in October 1909. And he said that after the overthrowing of Sultan Abdul Hamid, everyone could tell that the caliph was pretty powerless. It was more of a face. All right, he couldn't do anything without the new parliament, or the Grand Vizier was in his way, and all the other ministers. They were on his way from doing what he wanted to do. So the Young Turks, what they did is that when they came to power, they were, instead of Sultan Abdul Hamid, what he did was he had this, what the British would call a pan-Islamic idea. All right. What he would do is he would put Arabs, he would put even Jews and Armenians, Christian Armenians in the powers, like in the places that they could be. But he would put Arabs and all these minorities, like technically minorities, into positions of power. Okay. So this is why he was so loved by everyone. They all loved him. It's because he was fair. He wasn't like biased to the Turks only. He was giving power to these minorities. And in the regions where they had minorities, they would have Arab, Jewish, Armenian, whatever, governors in the region, Kurdish. All right. So everyone loved him. And then he was also modernizing, he was paying off the debts. He was building new railways with the help of the Germans. And overall, that's what happened. So this is why he was loved. But the Young Turks, when they came to power, they when they had the parliament, it was all Turkish, almost all Turkish. There was only a couple Armenians, a couple Ottoman Greeks, and a couple Jews and stuff inside the parliament. It was mainly Turks, and the ones with power were all Turks.
And was that a problem, Sheikh, within the Ottomans? The idea that it would be only Turks.
This was a problem.
For instance, the army consistent. Who did it consist of? Was it just the Arabs, or?
It mainly consisted of Turkish soldiers.
Really, the whole Ottoman, in the whole Ottoman Khilafah, I don't want to say empire, but the whole, you are really only the Turkish army?
Basically, only they would have like Armenian and Arab irregular and militia. But
Mm.
one thing is that throughout World War One, we see that a lot of the Ottoman generals they did not like these guys because they did not know they weren't like trained effectively, like they weren't put through rigorous training like all the Turkish soldiers were, and nor were they trustworthy. According to one report by the American attaché in Constantinople, they wrote that, paraphrasing here again, that the Ottoman leaders they did not deem the Arab or the Arab irregulars and militia as trustworthy, and that they were easily routed, and they usually were deserting in mass numbers throughout the war. All right, they were either becoming like they were just deserting and running away because they didn't want to fight, or they were joining the British Arab revolt, like insurgents.
Mm. So, so I guess the Arabs are already revolting at the time.
Not in it was after World War One began. The Ottoman Empire entered the war, and the Lawrence of Arabia and Britain started supporting these insurgents in the region.
So, Sheikh, when we talk about Gallipoli, and then, or at least the idea that okay, Gaza was going to be taken attacked 3 times, and then the British lose. This is all before World War One.
This is
I guess 1917. I guess all of this is happening in 1917 or during the war.
During the war. So the World War One began in 1914. November 1914 is when the Ottomans joined the war, but it started in July 1914, and it ended in 1918. Okay? And, well, if we want to say that the Ottoman army, actually, if we're talking about the Ottoman army, is that it went through a massive modernization after their defeat during the Balkan Wars, where they were absolutely smashed by the Greeks, Serbians, Montenegrins, and Bulgarians. Okay? So when it came to World War One, they actually wrote them. So Lieutenant Colonel Asim Gunduz, he wrote right after they lost the war. He wrote like a little booklet he identified problems in the army. Some of the main problems was poor coordination between units, like different units, cavalry, infantry, and artillery, and antique training methods, and problems when preparing for the war, and no morale. And by the time that World War One started, all of these problems were fixed. We see that the coordination between the Ottoman units was it was like top tier. It was probably easily one of the best in Europe. You know, that's how actually they defeated the British the first 2 times in Gaza, is by their artillery and coordination between infantry and their artillery. Same thing at Gallipoli. It was the usage of artillery in supporting infantry attacks and counterattacks and defending positions. So we see that was completely fixed. Antique training methods, they went through, when they changed the training methods, they made it more rigorous. They mainly focused, instead of focusing more on like marching and like listening to your commanders and the antique stuff like that from like the Napoleonic era, they were more focusing on using different arms, all right, and how to like use these arms and how to coordinate in an effective manner when on the battlefield. Like officers would learn that, and we see that put to use by generals like Halil Pasha. Halil Pasha, Mustafa Kemal. We see, I'm forgetting. Asim Gunduz was also there. We see, and also we also see that after the Balkan Wars, we see that they also purged the army from like relatively old generals and officers, and put in a lot of these new graduates from these new Turkish academies. So we see that during World War One, that a lot of the generals and commanders and officers all came from the classes between 1900 and 1912. These were relatively young and new generals, and they had battlefield experience in the Balkan Wars, and they knew these problems, and they fixed them in a very effective manner. They fixed them and were, they were very effective soldiers and commanders and generals. And this goes to the last point, which was no morale. Okay. In the Balkan Wars, we see the Ottomans easily being routed. But when we come to World War One, we see that these guys were they were determined, all right? Even when their casualties would be like 200,000 men or 80,000 men per campaign, we see that these guys were still fighting at like they were taking up like three men each, man. They were some beasts of soldiers. So, which is what Mehmet Chik means, little Muhammads. And during World War I, they kind of brought back this. You call it Islamist way if we're talking from an English point of view, but they were like they were very like determined to win the war. All right. And we could see that on many fronts. One of the main examples is the Siege of Medina. Okay.
Yeah. And this is when Siege of Medina happens when exactly?
1917, and it ends in 1919.
So, Sheikh, the British were already in Medina?
No, it was the Arab revolt. It was King Faisal.
Okay. So the British wanted to be I guess they were very careful in how they were going to do this because, let me ask you this. Okay, so the British, so seas they are surrounding Medina, and this is the Arab revolt.
Yeah.
Okay, so the British are also using Muslims as their soldiers.
Yeah, but if we want to, all right. So the British were using Muslims, but since in the region, they didn't really have the ability to move soldiers in because the Ottomans were guarding the borders on Egypt. And the only support they could give to these guys is using the Royal Navy's artillery and bombarding these positions on like Jeddah and stuff like that.
The British.
That's about it, the support they could give to and then they could also like smuggle in weapons through Yemen.
Then they entered Jerusalem 1917.
Yes. December 23rd or 24th, I'm forgetting exactly.
Right.
It was right
but the thing is, when they entered Jerusalem, it was the British army that actually entered Jerusalem.
Yes.
And the army, even at that time, consists of Muslims.
Yes, it did. It had a lot of Indian Muslim soldiers and Arab Muslim soldiers.
I mean, what an irony, man. I mean, so you're okay. So there's a Muslim army that's entering but by being used by the British, entering Jerusalem. So I guess it's kind of I don't know how to put it because when you think of the British have been trying to take Gaza. Was Gaza the actual point, or was it, I guess, the Levant in general?
All right, so the Hijaz was mainly like because the Arab insurgents mainly came from the Sharif of Mecca, Sharif Hussein. All right.
So it's Jazeera, it's not Levant, it's not Sham.
No, it's the Jazeera, but in Sham, they did have some insurgents, but it was mainly supported. Like they were smuggled weapons through Yemen to Sharif Hussein, and Sharif Hussein will get it to more insurgents in Sham.
And Yemen at the time is under the British.
Under the British control, yes.
I mean, I'm trying. So and the Yemen at this time, Sheikh, the Yemenis, these guys are. I mean, were they part of the Arab revolt?
No.
How did they use Yemen to get in? There was a deal made, or what?
No, they conquered it. It was under British control.
Oh, okay, so they did take over Yemen.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay, so now they come in. They're in Jerusalem, 1917. But they enter Jerusalem from where? From the Levant, I guess. From Gaza.
Yes. So right after they defeated
from Gaza, meaning from I see.
The Ottomans were forced to retreat to a new line, and they were defeated there at that line, and they had to fall back to Jerusalem. He surrounded it. So we see that in the first two victories of the Ottomans at Gaza, we see that they were very determined to win this. All right. And that even in the third, they were very determined to win it. They wanted to win. They were going to win. If we're talking, it was a more of failure on the commander's side in the third battle of Gaza, because Sir Edmund Allenby, he came after the first two, where the British were embarrassed, were humiliated, and their two failed invasions of Gaza. But one thing is that he, like, the British generals prior to him, like Winston Churchill and Chito, I'm forgetting their names, all of them, Chitoda or something like that, and Murray and all these other generals, they all thought that the Ottomans were this, like, the Ottoman soldiers were all weak, were, like, illiterate, were feeble-minded. They were like, because like the Ottomans came into World War I after the Balkans War. In the Balkan War, they were absolutely embarrassed. Their troops were like, they were getting captured and killed in in swaths. All right, they were so bad, like, by training, and like they were very they were very ineffective, their soldiers. And so the British thought that that's what they were, which is why we say that their failure to properly estimate the value of the Ottoman soldiers at the first two battles of Gaza, at Kut al-Ammar, at Medina, at Gallipoli, we see that they were underestimating the Ottoman soldiers, which is why they were getting defeated. Okay?
So, Sheikh, in Medina, when they come in Medina, the British are using the Arab soldiers there. The Arab revolt, I guess. That's they're already revolting.
Yeah.
So the revolt happens internally from within Medina and Mecca.
Not from internally. So what happened was, in 1917, Sharif Hussein sent Faisal and his sons to attack Medina using their insurgents and British weaponry, of course. They besieged the city. The Ottoman soldiers there, they were eating cockroaches to defend it for 3 years. Okay? So until the end of the war, they held out. All right? And it was only the Arab insurgents attacking them. Okay? And what happened was, even after the war, they were still holding the city. Okay? And then finally the British were like, what are you guys doing? Why haven't you taken the city? It's been like, what, 2 years? I'm not exactly sure. It was 1917, like the end, and then the beginning of 1919. So more like a year and a half kind of a thing. But they were like confused why the Arabs still haven't taken the city. All right? Because it was a very weak Ottoman division stationed there. Okay? So it wasn't that many men. And they've been starving. They've been living on cockroaches. And they're being attacked like almost every week. And how have you still not defeated them? And then you're using British artillery and weaponry, and you're still not able to break through. So finally, after the war ended, the British sent in their own troops. And finally, actually, they never even took the city. Okay? The only way they took the city is by bribing two Ottoman soldiers, or a bunch of Ottoman soldiers, to capture Fahreddin Pasha and open the doors for the British soldiers to enter.
Medina.
That's the way they defeated it.
No, hold on. This is when they entered Medina.
This is when they entered Medina.
So the British actually did enter Medina.
They did, but they couldn't win it with arms. They had to bribe some Ottoman soldiers to capture Fahreddin Pasha and open the front for them.
Wow. Okay. So, Sheikh, I mean, and where are in general? I guess is what you call decline. But the Muslims, when the British did come in, what happens to the Muslims inside Medina and Mecca, or at least Medina here? Mecca is a couple hours away, but
well, the city, it was already like pretty angry because, like, there's no food coming in. All right. And then they also, on top of that, have all these Ottoman soldiers to feed and heal because, they're getting a lot of injured from these like attacks that are coming in. So they also probably did not really like the Ottomans for holding out for this long, but they were definitely supportive because until the end, it was mainly Arab soldiers attacking them. Okay. And a lot of the Arabs at this time, the Arabs, they were paid heavily by the generals or the leaders. They were given a lot of money by the British to bribe them into it. And so the British, what happened was, a lot of the Arabs in the region, they already hated the Ottoman government. All right. Like I said, they were alienated from positions of power by the Young Turks and the COP or the COP. And a lot of the people that were put in power over them were Turkish nationalists. Okay. So like they
Mm.
didn't like
So
this
it
already.
became bad to worse.
Yeah. So when they were hearing that there's this Arab majority army attacking them, they were probably, I'm not exactly sure, don't take me honest, I don't know exactly how the people were feeling, but they would probably have been more supportive of the Arabs than the Ottomans.
Wow. Okay. So let's get to, okay, now Jerusalem falls.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even and when we think about what uh, I guess what the case was when the British were trying to take the Gaza for almost 2 3 different times, and they lost close to, you're looking at, you said about 300,000 people. I mean, I guess when in the all of Gallipoli here.
Yeah.
Uh, Sheikh, and then the complete loss happens in 1924. Um, so the modern Turkish army that we see today,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because a lot of times wherever the British went, they in some ways they created certain the infrastructure of the armies wherever before they left. Like you see that in India, Indian army, how it is set up, also Pakistan army and many of these armies. So was there any actual, restructuring done within the Ottoman or the Khilafah before the British kind of? I guess what I'm asking is, well, one, was there any restructuring by the British of the Turkish army or the Ottomans? And second, um, the British, did they actually enter Constantinople? Or I mean, sorry, did they actually enter Istanbul and all these areas?
Okay, so this is coming to, so after the Battle of Jerusalem, we see that the Ottoman army, and then later at the Battle of Megiddo in 1918, we see that the Ottoman army was still a very effective fighting force. They had the equipment, they had the men, they had the leadership in the army. But what happened was a failure in politics. Okay, we see that the government was pretty like incompetent, kind of a
Sheikh,
thing.
but okay, when you say they didn't modernize, but at the same time you're saying that they were pretty good at fighting.
Yeah. So, all right. I thought I might not have like went over this, but what happened was they did not modernize up until Sultan Abdul Hamid. And what Sultan Abdul Hamid did was he
Okay,
made
so he comes in and modernize. Okay,
a bunch of deals with the Germans. The Germans gave weapons for basically free, basically nothing, to the Sultan Abdul Hamid and the Ottoman army. They sent trainers. They sent everything that they needed, batteries, artillery, battleships. Well, not exactly battleships. They kind of gave it in a kind of a fluke deal, but you get what I mean. So they gave all this stuff for almost nothing. Okay. And the Ottoman army, and they were also like, they restructured it. So a lot of people, I want to also go over this, is that a lot of historians, people, they generally try to attribute the Ottoman army's successes in World War I to the Germans.
Mm.
This is not the case. Exactly. So, of course, the equipment all came from the Germans. And the funding, also, all the money for the railways, for the Baghdad-Berlin railway came from the Germans. Okay? This was mainly for, so it was mainly done, the restructuring of their army was by the Ottoman General Staff, by Ahmed Izzet Pasha, the Minister of War, and then after him, Enver Pasha. It was by these guys who tried it. So, of course, there was German advisors, but like it was mainly done by these guys who tried to make a model German army. They just looked at the German army and kind of copy and pasted it.
Oh, to the which is still the Ottoman Khilafah, still right now, still the Khilafah.
Yes,
and then you have Sultan Abdul Hamid at this time, who is monitoring all of this.
So this structuring. So during his time, he was mainly like not exactly modernizing. In some places he was modernizing, like in the army. We see that they did humiliate Greece in the 1897 war between them. He won the war, but that was mainly by German equipment. But when the Young Turks came to power, they didn't exactly keep up the modernization process. So when the Balkan War came around, they were humiliated, they were destroyed, they were like routed completely. And so what happened after the Balkan Wars is that they knew that they had to restructure their army into a new modern army. All right, they had to modernize it, they had to modernize everything, not just the equipment. They had to modernize their command structure. And like I already mentioned, like what Asim Kunduz wrote, like he outlined as problems inside the Ottoman army, he basically like, so what I'm trying to say here is that like they went a complete remodeling of the Ottoman army. So after Sultan Abdul Hamid, it was the Young Turks in power, and the Minister of Wars were the ones who were mainly doing this, which was first Ahmad Izzet Pasha, and then in January 1914 came in Enver Pasha. And then he kept up doing that. All right. And so what happened was they became a very effective fighting force. And as I said, no army is there without morale. And that these guys were determined. They built up the morale using Islam, Mehmed Chik and all that stuff, little Muhammads. That's what they were calling their troops. And they were using all this to try to boost the morale of their army, which succeeded. We see that they were holding lines. They would, like I said, in Medina, they were holding it for over a year. All right. And they were living in roaches.
So which means the people inside Medina, they were with the Ottomans.
Well, they couldn't really do much, but they probably were. There were definitely some who were with the army. But there could have also been some who did not like it. But I'm not exactly sure about what the people thought. But the Ottoman army, all I do know is that they were able to hold. They were determined to hold, and they were making sure that the insurgents, the Ottoman insurgents, and the British could not enter the city.
Wow! So Mecca, and then Mecca or Medina falls when, Sheikh? 1917, also almost the same time as Jerusalem.
After the war ends.
1918.
1919, after the war ends. So
okay, 1919. And then this is formation of Al Saud, I guess, because Saud came in power 22.
They might have, yes.
Right.
I'm not exactly
okay. Sure. So let's say 1919, 20, 21, 22. These 3 years, 3 to 4 years. This is so the British are already controlling what's happening in these areas, or Jaziratul Arab in general.
So yeah, they're controlling Sham. They were splitting up, Sykes-Picot. They split up the territory, Iraq and Sham with France and everything. And what happened was Turkey was also, so at some point, the Treaty of Sèvres, okay? So the first plan was to give Armenia this massive state, compared to their state now, was pretty big. It was a lot of northern Anatolia, northeastern Anatolia. All right. And the French gained some of the southeastern part of Anatolia. Italy gained a bunch of islands. Same with Greece. Greece was actually given from Izmir and the whole coastal city, territory around there. Istanbul was a joint occupation between the British and the French. Okay. So they jointly occupied the city. They had military troops in there. It was a military occupation of Istanbul and the Caliphate.
Oh, so okay, I had this understanding, I guess I was wrong, that foreign troops never really entered Istanbul, but they did.
They did. It was a military occupation.
And how long was the occupation, Sheikh? I mean, I guess, was the occupation the same way as what we know of what occupations look like, or was it just that, okay? I mean, what I'm saying, trying to figure out also is that the Muslims inside Istanbul, when there's this occupation, there's no revolt against the occupation?
No, not really. It's because the British had so many troops there, and so many French troops were also there, that they actually forced the Caliph to sign the Treaty of Sèvres. It was a forced signing because they had the city. What are they going to do? Okay. So this is why what I meant by the Ottoman army, it could have fought for another, like, well, we could even say that it could have, like, we see Mustafa Kemal when he was in Ankara, which was because that's why the capital was moved to Ankara, is because the Istanbul was occupied. Mustafa Kemal and the other Turkish nationalists were in Ankara now. All right, and they fought the independence. So we see that the Ottoman army, it was just the Ottoman army fighting the Turkish War of Independence, or what's called the Turkish War of Independence. It was the Ottoman army. It wasn't a bunch of Turkish farmers who were given rifles like you might think. It was literally the Ottoman army fighting it, using all the equipment, generals, everybody was the same. They were just rebranded from the Ottomans to the Turkish.
Okay, so where does Ataturk come in? When does he come in the picture?
So in 1919, so he basically, along with a bunch of other Turkish nationalists, they did not like this Treaty of Sèvres. They hated the Greeks too, and the Greeks were given all this territory. They felt like we were robbed because now we just have this like mountain territory that there's really nothing there. So along with the Turkish nationalists, they basically went ahead and fought back against the Greeks. And the French and the Armenians and the Armenians. And one thing is that they were actually given supplies by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union emerged this time, and they were sending supplies towards them to help them win back Turkey. And so what happened was at the Treaty of Lausanne, which was in 1923, they basically made this new Turkish Republic. All right.
Sheikh, so the modern Turkey, the borders of modern Turkey.
Yeah.
This is basically set up then by the British.
I won't be surprised if it is, because the way Mustafa Kemal was able to defeat all of these nations at the same time, all right, and they were really powerful, you know, they had a bunch of troops there, and he was able to defeat them all at the same time. You have to think that there was someone else helping him out, all right, because even I'm surprised that he was able to do that. Even with the Ottoman army, he was fighting the Armenians, he was fighting the French, he was fighting the Italians, he was fighting the Greeks, he was fighting the British, he was fighting everyone. All right, and he still came out on top. How was that? That doesn't sound. Not even the Ottoman army at its peak. Well, maybe like at its peak during World War I in the beginning, it probably could not have done that. So you have to think that there's someone else helping him out there. And actually, he never really invaded Constantinople. All right, he never took it back. There was no. All right, it was basically that he defeated the Greeks, defeated the French, he defeated the Armenians, and so he sat down the British at the table. They gave him all the territory back and to the modern day Turkish borders. And which is why recently we see Erdogan fighting over in 2023. He was fighting with the Greeks over the islands.
Right.
Because of the Treaty of Lausanne. Because there was like some passage, I'm not sure because I've never actually read the treaty, but like he said that it was like 100 years that the Greeks had to give
the 100-year thing that finished. Okay. Yeah, that was supposed to be part of the.
That was the Treaty of Lausanne, and that's what Mustafa Kemal signed. And then in 1924 was the formal like destruction of the Ottoman Khalifa. And but we could say that it was probably destroyed when the British occupied Istanbul.
And this is wow. I mean, an army that is taking over Europe by the end of almost 1919 is being taken over by Europe.
It wasn't taking over Europe. So one thing is that the Ottomans, another thing is that in the war, they were not, they weren't on, like in some points they were on the offensive, but they weren't really on the offensive in Europe because the majority of their European border was with Bulgaria. And Bulgaria was a central power. It was part of the alliance with Germany. So why would they fight each other when they were both dealing with Serbia and Greece? And Greece was also like, it didn't really fight the Ottomans that much. It mainly was fighting with Bulgaria or supporting the Serbians against the Austro-Hungarians. So
from 1500, 1670, most of this time, the Ottoman Empire is just basically whatever it is, it kind of stays there.
So over time, they do lose a ton of territory. The independence of Greece, Montenegro, Bosnia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Austria, all of these places, like they were controlling all these places, even parts of Poland they were controlling. And now these were all new independent nations by this now, or were part of other empires like Russia or Austria-Hungary. And so then these guys, they all kind of hated the Turks, Balkan stuff, they all hated the Turks, they hate each other. And right after they got done defeating the Turks, they all went to each other's throats in the Second Balkan War. But yeah, so this was in 1913 to 1914. We see that or 1912 to 1914, we see that or 1912 to 1913, we see that the Balkans, in the beginning, for the first year, they were fighting with the Turks. All of them made the Balkan League, which was Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece. They all fought the Turks. They basically destroyed them. And like I said, they humiliated them. They took over all the European territories besides Eastern Thrace and Edirne, or Adrianople. And we see them that right after the war, they all fought each other. Like a month after the war, they all went to each other's throats for the new territory because they all claimed it as theirs. So that's basically what happened. They weren't actually invading Europe, but Europe was attacking them. And so they were on the defensive. And we see that so they did do campaigns, like they tried to attack the Suez Canal. They tried to attack the Caucasus. And when the British or the Russians took over territory, they would counterattack and retake it. Those were the moments where they were on when they were on the offensive. But majority of the war, they were on the defensive. All their victories, besides Qutb al-Ammara, were on the defensive.
And this is because why is that exactly?
It was more because, well, the two times, like I said, and that's the Battle of Suez Canal and their invasion of the Caucasus, they were massive.
They were what?
Failures. They were
Really?
absolute. Yes. So this is why they went on the defensive, because they lost so many men in the Caucasus and at the Suez Canal, at the Battle of Suez Canal, that they decided that they knew that the British were not ready and the Russians were not ready for another offensive. So they decided to sit back. And what they did was their defensive strategy was successful in terms of what they were trying to do. And it was just that some very small mistakes led to them being pushed back. And then the government being completely incompetent and trying to make deals. And like when they were forced to sign the treaty, the Ottoman army was still fighting. They could have still went on for months. Like I said, Mustafa Kemal, he just renamed the Turkish army and used it against the British. So that's what happened. So we see that the Ottomans were mainly on the defensive. So they were defending, and they were defending very well. All right, so we can't take anything from that. They were a very successful defensive force.
Okay, well, let's go to another question here. Why such mashallah, Sheikh, that just the amount of dates you have to remember, and then the events and all these names, and I guess, territories and the names of the generals and all this. Sheikh, why such interest in history for you?
Yeah. Oh, I have no clue. I guess I picked up a book. Oh, so what happened was when I was really young, maybe like
when you were young. That's very nice. Okay, go ahead.
8 or 7. I don't know. Now I felt like an 80-year-old man when I was young.
When you were very young.
Yeah, but I was like 7, maybe 7 or 8, maybe 6. I'm not exactly sure. I used to read the Who Was series.
Okay.
So Who Was, X, Y, and Z. I used to love them. I have a ton of their books. I still read them a lot. Now they kind of got washed. Now they're talking about people now like Barack Obama, LeBron James. I'm not going to read that. But when I was young, I was reading these like books, and like I guess that sparked my interest in history. And over time, I've just been upgrading to better books and bigger books. And now I've tried to read more. And one thing that really interests me is World War I. And so one thing is that when I was reading these books, like you find a lot of conflicting data. Okay. So like a lot of the books nowadays, you would say that one big difference that the Ottomans were a bunch of ragtag militias, their skin was saved by the Germans. every single time, of course. And another one was that the Ottoman army was forced into the war, even though it was a calculated decision by the ones at the top that they wanted to join the war. And so a lot of people, like even Sultan Abdul Hamid, he said that he would have joined the war on the side of the British. Okay, which is, he was probably correct, and the war probably would have ended a lot faster if he was. But if we see that at the time Germany was definitely the better option, because Germany had the best military, like ground forces, infantry, cavalry, and equipment, tanks, and everything. They had the best of the best. They had the best of everything. All right, the British, they only had a better navy and a bigger.
I guess they were also right in the territory. They were closer than where the British were. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, you could probably say that, because also the Germans were funding a lot of the railway, the Baghdad-Berlin railway. They were funding that. Completely came from the Germans, and only a little bit actually came from the Ottomans. So, and because they wanted so at this time, Germany was finding allies, okay? Because everyone knew that Europe was heading into a massive war. And one of the allies that they were finding were the Ottomans. They were in the same situation as the Austro-Hungarians kind of thing, just less modernized comparatively. Okay, so what they did is they just like sent a bunch of missions with weaponry, training guides, and other things to support them and help them fight against Russia. Because one big reason why they did not go on the side of the Entente, which was the Allies, which is Britain, France, Russia, Greece, Serbia, all of the other ones, was because they didn't like Russia. And Russia also didn't want them to be part of the alliance, which is why.
So at that time, you're talking this area, okay, you're saying Russia, but I guess the Eastern Europe area, this is Yugoslavia is still there. This is.
No, it was Serbia.
Oh, and then it fought
after World War II.
After World War II. Oh, okay. So Serbia included. What did Serbia actually include?
Serbia was just Serbia. Like it looked almost like modern day Serbia. It was the same.
Oh, thing. Really? But then Yugoslavia comes around after World War II. Is this what the communist making or what?
Communist making, yeah.
Okay, Tito. So those guys, the Soviet Union makes this happen in Eastern Europe. Okay, Sheikh, I mean, I know I wanted to say that was the last question, but look, now, the Soviet Union is formed when exactly?
1917.
Okay. And then the Ottomani Khilafah falls apart in 1924, 1917, the British are entering Jerusalem, 1919, Medina is defeated, let's say. And what's happening in Mecca at the time? Mecca is
controlled by the insurgents.
Oh, okay, it's controlled by the insurgents, which is basically okay. So the revolt, the Arab revolt, is happening there. So that's the Arab already. Okay, and then the Soviet Union have anything to do with the defeat of the Ottomani Khilafah?
No. So they were in the middle in 1917 because of the communist revolution. And since the Russians left the war, the Germans actually had a chance of winning the war. It was just that America joined the war right after the Soviet Union were defeated. So what happened is Britain was like, now we have all these American troops. We could divert some troops down to the Middle Eastern front. And that's what they did. And using all of these troops and equipment that they had, they easily broke through the depleted Ottoman army at this point of war. But even though it's depleted, it was still a very good army comparatively to a lot of the other armies.
So it's fighting.
Yes.
Okay. And when you say Germany, this is Bismarck.
The German Empire. So Wilhelm II, Bismarck too. Yeah, he was the general at the time. Yeah.
Okay, so this is okay. So that's when, and then 1924. Now, when the treaty is signed to dissolve the Khilafah, what happens to this army?
So the army
the occupation is then removed. Is that first thing? That's what they do. Is that okay? All the European armies, they go back.
Yeah.
But it's funny that they didn't want to occupy physically the way they kind of did to the other regions.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Is that that's another thing. I was always wondering that what if that he was just like a puppet, that he was just given power because Britain at this time was also very spreadly thin.
You're
They
talking
lost
about Mustafa Kemal now.
Somalia.
Uh-huh. Okay, I see.
They were spread thin.
Lanatullahi alayha.
They were weak. They lost millions of troops in the war. All right,
Germans.
Britain.
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay,
they're
so
fighting. They were. I mean,
they
they're
were
fighting almost everywhere in the whole world.
yeah. So they lost millions of troops. They lost not just British troops, they also lost colonial troops. Then they also lost um, their African troops.
So
And
when
so
you
we
say million troops, you're looking at 1 million actual British troops, or
no, we're talking about all the whole
okay,
imperial
yeah,
army.
total. Because I mean, they used all the colonial army
Yeah.
that they had. Okay.
What happened was like in Europe, the nearest expeditionary force would be the English army. So we see that in Europe it was mainly British soldiers, but in the Middle East we see it was mainly African and Indian troops
Mm.
because they didn't have any British troops to send. They were all in France. All right. And so what happened was the only British troops you would find would be like the ones already stationed prior to the war in Kuwait, in Egypt, and in Yemen. Those were the only British soldiers you could really find. And maybe a few divisions after America enters the war were re-diverted towards this new front.
So, but when you say African troops are who? The Egyptians, Libyans, the North Africans, or what?
Not Libyans. It was like when I say African, I mean like the Central Africans.
Oh wow. Okay. So the northern Africa was who under the French control?
So Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia was controlled by the French. Libya was actually controlled by the Ottomans until 1912, and then we see Omar Mukhtar here.
Fighting the Italians.
And then the Italians come in, so he's there, and then the British control Egypt and Sudan. This is North Africa at this time. All right, and so what happened was the British were using a lot of these it's like these African troops. When I say African, I mean like from the colonial holdings, so like Central Africa,
Mali. You're looking at Sahel area.
That's French territory at this time. So the French were using them, but the French weren't exactly fighting the war in the Middle East at this time. So a lot of their African troops were in France.
So when you say for African, you're saying Central Africans. That's
Southern Africans, only the territories that were controlled by Britain at this time.
Oh wow! So they're using them and the Indians in the Middle East.
Yeah, because those are the nearest people they could call on to send to the front.
And then when you say rebellion, you're saying so there was actually the Arab revolt was they were actually okay. So they're being supported by the British and they're revolting. Mm-hmm. What were the numbers like, Sheikh? When we look at the Arab revolt, means what exactly?
So you really don't know since there was like multiple insurgent groups. It was pretty it wasn't that much. It was less than 100,000. I'll tell you that much. But I'm not exactly sure because you can find different numbers.
Total Arab revolt, the numbers look like about 100,000 or so.
Less, much less. So it wasn't that, but since they were like insurgencies are really hard to fight. We see that even the American army couldn't fight against Iraq and the insurgents, right. Mm-hmm. Syria and Afghanistan, and their numbers were also pretty frugal. They were meager soldiers. We're not talking about 1 million insurgents to deal with. We're talking how much are the Taliban at the time of the war? You might know that.
Taliban. The number of Taliban you're against the Americans?
Against the Americans, yeah.
I mean, the total loss of the Taliban, their numbers is, they say close to 600,000 killed.
Killed? But that was over time. But what was their
20 years, yeah. Total, 20 years of war. I don't know the exact numbers of what but it wasn't.
It won't go over a million.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm talking about the total shuhada. When they're talking about, they say about 600,000 killed in about 20 years, the whole 20 years of war. So even if you're looking at maybe 20 years for 600,000, probably you're looking at no more than 60, 70,000 people. Yeah, that's it. At one time fighting.
You could probably say much less than that because it's just the Arabs, and not even all Arabs were with them. A lot of them were also in the Ottoman army, and some were just neutral, they were just hiding away. They didn't want to fight on either side.
So look, when you say Arabs here, these Arabs were who exactly? They were really, are these just, you're looking at Arabs who were disheartened by the way, I guess, the nepotism, the kind of things that were happening within the Ottomans, they were just kind of, they didn't want to do anything with them. Who are the actual, when we say these are the people who are revolting, these are which Arabs? Who are they?
So a lot of the Arabs were either like the followers of Sharif Hussein or like his personal, the people of like under him, or they were so a lot of them were, some of them were deserters of the Ottoman army. Like they were like,
oh, they were, okay, that's interesting to me.
Why the Ottomans hated them in the war. A lot of the Ottoman generals despised the Ottoman fighters is because they were deserting in mass numbers, and they were easily destroyed. Like you're not even coming up against much, and they would run away. All right,
really,
from the British, because a lot of them were just Bedouins handed a rifle and sent to the front. Barely any training, barely any nothing. They don't even know what the Ottoman government is. Probably, they don't even know the guy in power. They just know that they're given a rifle. They were found out in the desert. They were handed them a rifle and they threw them in the regiment. And a lot of them were illiterate too. None of them could even read. They couldn't even speak Ottoman Turkish. They couldn't even talk with their officers. All right, so they didn't even know what they were doing. So this is why a lot of the Ottoman officers do not really they despise the Otto regiments in the army, which is also why you see that a lot of them were deserting because they didn't even know why they were fighting for these guys. And then the British were offering them money and power and stuff. So they would go desert to them and defect from both sides.
Sheikh, I promise you, this is final questions. But when we look at what's happening today in Gaza, right? And when you look at the response of the Arabs in general, are you surprised at all?
Well,
from the historical perspective, I guess, when you're looking at history and what you're looking at today, does that surprise you that they left Gaza to be in the condition that it is?
So the Arab armies, the Arab government now for the past since their creation in the 30s, 40s, and 20s. And then later on 60s, 50s, and 70s, and 80s, and whatnot, we see that a lot of them, they did not do anything. All right. We see that Second Intifada, the Intifada, and these, where were they? They didn't do anything. 2006, 2014, the Gaza episodes, 2021, when they were bombing in Ramadan. And every Ramadan, you would have, I remember this. This is pretty recent. I remember because it was after COVID, after Ramadan, after we eat iftar, we'd always have Al Jazeera. My dad would always have Al Jazeera playing. So I remember all this, all this stuff going on in Gaza, in Ramadan, in Palestine. So we see that it was all, they didn't do nothing. And then now it's been 2 years now, right? 2 years?
Yeah. Almost 19 months, 20 months.
Yeah, so... and we saw they're not going to do anything. Even Iran, whatever they did, it was pretty lackluster. It was pretty meager. So there's some things that you need in an army to win wars. All right, we see that the Ottoman army. So in World War I, their objectives. Every army has to have an objective before going to the war. What do you want to achieve in this war? Why are you going to this war in the first place? What do you want to achieve? The Ottoman army, they wanted to achieve, they wanted to grow stronger after the war. They wanted to have a rebirth. They wanted to survive in the war so that they could gradually become a stronger entity. After which, bombed it. They didn't do that. And Germany, of course, their objective in the war was to gain more power. Britain was to neutralize these European powers that were threatening itself. Okay, like Russia and Germany. So we see that that's why they were entering the war. And the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary were just a nuisance for the British, like in the beginning of the war. And then later in the war, they actually started seeing the Ottomans as a worthy opponent, not like what they saw them before. So now coming to today, like I said, every army has to have an objective. That's one thing when they go into a war. We saw Israel's objective to neutralize the Israeli nuclear program. That was their objective, correct?
Oh, you mean the Iranian,
The Iranian nuclear program.
right, Iranian, yeah.
But the Iranians, what was their objective? Was it just to do something to respond? I don't see any objective.
There was, yeah. It seems like. By the way, where were the Persians in all of this?
Okay. So the Persians at this time were, striking deals with the British. All right.
Oh, you're looking at, I guess that's the Anglo oil thing going on. Yeah. I guess at that time. So this is what 1902, I guess.
Yeah. So this is what they were. So they weren't exactly under British occupation, but like they weren't in the war either. They were a neutral side. They weren't doing nothing. They were just sitting there and watching it unfold.
Which is very funny, man. I mean, so in the Ottoman Empire or the Ottoman Caliphate, what was the role of the Persians?
They really did nothing. I think there was a couple times that the war kind of went over the border.
No, I mean, did the Ottomans ever control Persian territory?
So they did at some point in like the 1600s, and then
okay. So you're looking at that being those guys were the Safavids.
Yeah, when they took over.
Okay. So that's that Shah Ismail episode, I guess.
Yeah, and then they controlled it for a long time, and then the Iranians, and I think they just kind of like lost the territory gradually to these new Iranian shahs, or they just completely ditched the territory and withdrew to consolidate. Because like a lot of the territory, like this was before the founding of oil and the usage of oil, so there was really nothing. Like, why did you want all this mountains? It was pretty useless for the Ottomans to control.
Because most of the area is nothing but mountains.
Yeah. Well, there was oil there, but they didn't discover it yet, and there was no use for oil either at the time. So, yeah.
1902.
Yeah.
The British were already making money. Almost 85% was going to them, if not more, supposedly. But yeah, 85%.
Yeah.
Wow. And the Ottomans never figured out a way to use oil at all in that whole 20 years.
At this oil, no. So over time, oil wasn't this actually like a major what
it is today
resource. It wasn't there because at that time, a lot of the vehicles because in the beginning of World War I, we see that they weren't any vehicles, all right? The only ground vehicles there were horses or one-man planes. So you can only fit a guy in there and he's throwing a grenade over the top. That's it he was doing. That's what the concept of bombers was. And, they needed oil, but the Ottomans did have that, but they didn't need too much oil. They didn't have a massive air force, okay?
Okay, so there was no... I mean, but man, let me ask you this though. So the British, the Anglo oil company that exists, these guys already have railways running.
Yeah.
1902.
Mm-hmm.
But that was mostly run by coal. I guess there was no use of oil. That's still.
Yeah. There wasn't nothing really.
Man, and then did the Ottomans ever use those trains, or they didn't even have? How was the territory connected, man? They just interlocked, I guess, landlocked, is that?
So actually, that's one thing, is that what Sultan Abdul Hamid did was he connected all the territory, using the Hijaz Railway, the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. So all these railways all combined the territory. And so this is why everyone loved him. It's because, he was uniting the territories. He was putting the Arabs in power. Everyone in power. He was giving them money and power, and then he was also, giving them and he was supporting them. He was fair. He was not biased to Turks like the Young Turks were, the CUP. All right, he was connecting it, and he was making it easier for Muslims. All right, that's one thing. Is that this is why a lot of the British at this time. This is where you could probably first hear the usage of pan-Islamism. It's from this time. It's because this is what they called Abdul Hamid, because he wasn't a Turkish nationalist. He wasn't a bias to the Arabs or the Arabs or the whoever, the Kurds or whatever. He was uniting the territory. That's basically one thing. So that's what the railway systems were used. But yeah, it was usually run on coal.
Subhanallah. All right, Sheikh. There is what else should we know? this is the last question. What should we know about why is it, okay, I guess, number one, why is it important to know this? Because, I mean, for me, this is fascinating stuff, man, because, when I'm looking at, when I'm looking at what's happening to us today, right? And when we look at all these cartoonic states that we have and how they've been created in the last 50 years, some last 20 years, and then when we look at just the way these states behave, the Uthmani Khilafah, or its existence, and then after its existence, it played a lot of role in what we see today, the Muslim land. What we see of the Muslim land today, right? I mean, it's all over the place with lack of almost any leadership or anything that's worth. So, why do we need to know this, Sheikh? I mean, if somebody's watching this show and they say, man, this is a lot of information to know, but why is it important for Muslims to know this?
So if we think about it, this was the last war the Muslims have ever been a part of. Okay, this was the last war that the Muslims, like in general, were fighting, and they were even winning in some cases. Okay, so this was, and that we could see the last effective use of Islam, like this, the Muslims. This is the first effective use the last effective use as an army. All right, we see now the armies are all just sitting there in barracks and in airfields, just sitting there rusting away. All right, well, what have they been except bombing Yemen, like Saudi Arabia has been doing, and UAE, or giving them weapons to the Sudanese militias,
right,
or bombing Iraq, or letting the United States use their airfields to bomb Afghanistan. All right, and we see that the Ottoman army, this is the last time that we've seen a competent Muslim army. All right, that's the key thing, is that it was a competent Muslim army. All right, because we see that Iran can't even wage a war against Israel. Like, if, in my opinion, they lost the war. All right, even though they bombed a bunch of places in Israel, they still lost the war, because you have to say they didn't have any objective going into the war. And this is one thing that you have to have. Every army needs to have. They have to have an objective going into the war, going to any war. Okay, what did you want to achieve? What do you want to gain?
But in this case, they were just attacked. I mean, preemptive. It seems like, they had no objective from from any perspective. So all of a sudden they're attacked, a preemptive attack by this Israel, and then they have no choice but to enter the war, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but even in it, you just have to write down or think about an objective that you want to face. Like, what would their objective be? To actually try and help the people of Gaza. That could have been a solid, because that's a.
I see what you're saying.
Finding out an objective, you have to find a reasonable one. You don't want to say we're going to conquer the whole world in 2 years, right? Or we're going to conquer the whole Middle East in 2 years. You have to make it reasonable. So let's say we're going to help the people of Gaza. We're going to eradicate the Zionist state, and let's say a time of 5 years. All right, or heck, if 1 year is possible, you get 1 year.
I mean, half of it was wiped out almost.
Yeah, it wasn't every.
In 5 days, 5 days of war. Imagine 5 years or 5 months, like 5 weeks.
You could drive a car for 2 days. Imagine driving a tank against little. Like, they won't even have much, because why would they nuke themselves? So their nuclear capabilities is also not there. So so that's an easy objective, is to support the people of Gaza, or at least help them out. Or maybe give them air support against and bomb the Israeli airfields that are bombing them, and give weapons to people there that want change, kind of a thing. Okay, or they could even send their own army, even though that might be kind of troublesome if you're trying to think, because they also have to go through Iraq and then Jordan, who's literally protecting the Israeli borders. Are they protecting them?
Yeah, of course.
So they would have to go through all of that. So they would have to defeat the Jordanians, and then they would be able to get through. But even then, that's still possible. That's
at least there would be some type of objective than what we saw, the weird show that we saw for the 2-3 weeks.
we saw the Israeli objective, all right, but we did not see any sort of objective from Iran. All right,
Mm. That is
a,
an interesting take.
they
Yeah, that's fair. That's true.
So this is one thing that a lot of like leadership has to know is that you have to have objectives before going into war. Like, and they have to be reasonable too. You can't just say, "Oh, I want to kill this guy tomorrow." Even though you could probably do that if you get a bomber, you just drop it, find out his location, and nuke him or bomb him if you find out where he is. But you should still like that. The objective now for all Muslim nations should just be to eradicate the Zionist entity and then reestablish the Khilafah. That should be a major objective. It could be in a 30-year plan. This is another thing. You have to have a 100-year plan or something like it. A 30-year plan, a 40-year plan for their military and their state. What do they want to achieve in that time period? All right, we saw China's to become an economic powerhouse in the region over the last 50 years.
Right, and they achieved it in many ways.
They've achieved it. And what's the American? The American 100-year plan is to keep and maintain their global hegemony. All right, that's their 100-year plan. All right, but what are any of the Muslim nations? What are their 100-year plans?
To be part of the American plan.
Yes.
That's the objective. There you go. See, there is an objective. There has to be one.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, what a mess we're in, man. But
you have to have objectives. You have to have plans for your country, and you can't make it like, oh, I want to still be part of the American plan, because they're so cool, freedom, oil, you have to say that what do the people want? Like, what is the best option? Like at this time, maybe not economically, the Khilafah is the best option because then you're going to go to war with a bunch of nations, but it's still a very viable option. Everyone's going to support you. All right, we were 2 billion people are going to support you. All right, and then you even see that, and comparatively, even the Kuffar or their and the Europeans and the Americans, they're already pretty divided. The Russians won't come to their help; they're busy in Ukraine. The Germans are militarizing, but steadily. And they're not trying to find.
Europe is weak. That's true. You're very weak, to be honest. Yeah.
And America's also
Americans are the ones that are protecting Europe, it seems.
Yeah, and America is also weakening. All right, we saw how obsolete their army was in Iraq because all you have to do is another thing that every army needs to understand is to understand your enemy, to know your enemy. All right, know their weapons, know how they fight wars. Look at their literally. When was the Taliban coming to power? 2021, right? And the Americans left, or Iraq in 2000. When did they withdraw? 2011. Something like that. They withdrew, all right, due to all the insurgency going on. Now you know how to fight them because America is a conventional enemy. Or you have to fight it in unconventional ways. Insurgency is easily the easiest one. But, of course, you can't be a khilafah and be an insurgency at the same time. That's like an ISIS looking thing. All right. You can't because they were failures. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't even follow Islam properly. You could kind of say that too. They were killing everyone besides the people who followed them. Even Muslims. All right, so they were pretty.
Yeah, it's a complete mess.
So you have to know their enemy. So you have to also know their weaknesses and strengths and how to neutralize those strengths. All right, what is the strengths of the American army? Their air force, maybe you could say, or the Israelis, their air force. All right, well, when have we seen their military, ground forces in action? Was in Gaza, and they failed miserably. They haven't taken that 2 miles long of territory in 2 years, or almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Their strengths of their air force. What is the weaknesses of those planes? You have to find that out. All right. So, because we could even say that America, a lot of its weaponry has been seen in use recently. Javelin anti-tank missiles, they're all computerized. We see they're coded, and whatever could be we see that there's autopilot tracking systems, there's radar, and all of it's coded onto this app on their fighter jets and onto these weapons. And whatever could be coded could be hacked. Or all you have to do is hack into it, and you cook it, and then just land it forcefully or blow it up. It's that easy. You just have to understand the weaknesses of your own opponent and strengths and how to neutralize those strengths. And then you also have to understand, like I said, have an objective, all right, that you want to reach, not just militarily, but with your country. All right, what do your people want, and what would be the best fit for them? Okay, and then know your opponents. You have to know your enemy. If you don't know your enemy, you're going to lose. All right, so this is just some things, and we see that the Ottoman Empire, they in World War One, they had their objective, and even though their objective could be questioned, was to survive during the war, which at the time that was probably the most viable option for the Ottoman army at the Ottoman Empire at the time, because it was still relatively weak compared to the other European powers. But they had that objective, and they could have reached the objective if it wasn't for the government incompetency, surrendering and so early. Like, they surrendered before Germany, even though they could have fought longer than them. All right. And same with the Russians. The Russians left, all right, so they didn't even have to worry. They had all these troops from the northern regions, and they could have sent them to the front, but they did, but they still were destroyed. Like, the Germans did that too, and they were still were destroyed. So we see that they didn't exactly adequately, succeed in their objective. They didn't reach that milestone yet. But so you just have to. So of course you have to have reasonable objectives, and then you have to understand or know how to work towards that objective, or that 100-year plan that you have. So that's one thing that's key. That you have to have these two things when running a state and a military, and also to understand the region around you. Yeah, it's like the Middle East. Who are your enemies? Who are your friends? Who's going to help you out? All right. You have to understand this before you go into wars and stuff. And that's one thing that Iran failed in.
All right, Sheikh. Jazakallah khair for your time. And this is, there's a lot to, inshallah, unpack in there. I mean, I'm going to go back and listen to this whole thing, because there's so much to know. I didn't know many of the facts that you were mentioning. First of all, I didn't think Istanbul was actually occupied the way you said they were actually occupied by the British. And I didn't think even Mecca or Medina was actually controlled by the British, although insurgency, but at least backed by the British Empire. So, subhanAllah, a lot to learn. And inshallah, we will bring you back, Sheikh, for many other historical discussions that we need to have. So hopefully you have your eye on the current events and the past, so that you can continue to explain to the Muslims what's happening, inshallah. All right, Shaykhi, Jazakallah khair for your time, and may Allah continue to give you the tawfiq to be the, inshallah, the brain of the Muslims, bi'idhnillah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Have me here. Wa alaikum assalam.